that Johnson would only make a perfect deal on the border. If there is no deal, would you put the blame at the feet of Trump and Republicans bending the knee to Trump?
Well, it's my full and complete expectation that extreme MAGA Republicans will continue to take orders from former President Trump, because that's basically what they have been doing since the former president, as a candidate, came down that staircase in the summer of 2015. The Republican Party is the party of Donald Trump. And unfortunately, we have not seen a willingness to break from the extremism that Donald Trump wants to continue to visit upon this country. We have a Democratic Senate, a Democratic president, and a barely Republican dysfunctional majority in the House. That means that the only way to solve problems for the American people is that we find bipartisan common ground. As Democrats have continued to indicate, we are willing to do on any issue, including addressing our broken immigration system. And it will be unfortunate but not unsurprising if House Republicans continue to take orders from Donald Trump.
We have the special election coming up next month, New York's 3rd district, obviously crucial to helping Democrats close the Republican majority. Can you speak about your efforts in that race and whether you have any plans to travel to the 3rd in the coming weeks?
Well, Tom Suozzi is running his race. He's a well-known, well-respected public servant in the 3rd Congressional District, and he's focused on making it clear that he wants to come back to Congress to get things done, to solve problems in a bipartisan fashion, and to make life better for the people of Nassau County and Queens. He's doing a tremendous job, as far as I can tell, in communicating that message anywhere and everywhere, and I would expect that he is going to run hard down the stretch, and then it will be in the hands of the voters of the 3rd Congressional District.
The House Budget Committee is currently marking up the establishment of a bipartisan fiscal/debt commission. I know you've been asked about this a couple times, but have you made up your mind on where you stand on the establishment of a debt commission?
Haven't been able to closely evaluate the proposals that are going to be marked up before the Budget Committee today. However, I do support the amendments that are going to be put forward by Brendan Boyle and the Democratic members of the committee to make it clear that we want to protect and strengthen Social Security and Medicare and not undermine Social Security and Medicare, which is clearly the intentions of the extreme MAGA Republicans. So at the end of the day, I'll evaluate what proposal is referred out of the Budget Committee, but if it's not clear that Social Security and Medicare are protected, then it will be my expectation that there will be a lukewarm response at best when it hits the floor.
There's a, you and the rest of leadership endorsed Summer Lee earlier this week. Do you have plans to endorse any other members who are facing contested primaries, particularly those that have potential involvement of AIPAC?
My endorsement of Summer Lee speaks for itself.
Are you endorsing Pablo Hernandez for Resident Commissioner of Puerto Rico?
I have not considered an endorsement in that race yet, but I do have a lot of respect for Pablo.
Any more thoughts on the tax package that was rolled out? You've had another day to look at it.
We are in the process of evaluating the tax package, and I'm talking to Richie Neal, Susan Del Bene, and other members of the Ways and Means Committee to assess what our perspective should be on moving it forward. In my preliminary assessment, it's clear that the child tax credit provisions do not go as far as they should relative to what President Biden and Democrats were successfully able to do in terms of the child tax credit that was in the American Rescue Plan, particularly as it related to monthly payments and refundability. That said, some movement on the child tax credit is clearly better than no movement, and the provisions related to the low-income housing tax credit and disaster relief are also meaningful. But until the Ways and Means Committee on the Democratic side has had a full opportunity to evaluate the totality of the proposed legislation, I'm going to reserve judgment.
Thank you.
When Speaker Johnson went down to Eagle Pass, Texas, he brought a group of Republicans with him, and one of the first things he said is that President Biden could be doing more on border security. You met with the president yesterday. Did you get a feeling from that meeting that President Biden has done everything he could possibly do?
President Biden is working extremely hard to address the challenges on the southern border and made it clear in the meeting that he wants to fix our broken immigration system in a comprehensive and bipartisan way that is effective in meeting the needs of the American people. House Democrats are going to continue to support the effort to try and find an effective and humane solution to the challenges that we are confronting on the southern border. And I certainly have full faith and confidence in President Biden in the ability to meet the needs of the American people, as he has done on so many other issues, including leading the economic recovery.
A quick follow-up. The issue seems to be that the president wants an ideal. He wants support from both sides, but the other side obviously is not budging. And they've said they're going to do a number of things to prevent any sort of traction on border, progressing the border security matter. And so with that being the case, what message is the country sending, or President, Democrats sending to asylum seekers who were here today at the Capitol, trying to push to make sure that asylum policies are secure? What message does it send to them that the president is saying, I'm waiting on the other side, when the other side isn't budging?
Well, let's see what happens with the ongoing negotiations in the Senate with respect to the supplemental funding bill that includes some consideration of addressing the challenges at the border. President Biden was very clear in the meeting at the White House that something needed to happen, but that, of course, it needed to be effective, humane, and bipartisan. Senate Democrats are in conversation with Senate Republicans, and it's my understanding and expectation that once the continuing resolution issue has been resolved, that the Senate negotiators are going to turn to trying to close on an agreement. Once they do so, we'll all have an opportunity to evaluate the merits of the legislation.
Just to follow up on that, yesterday Speaker Johnson said that now is not the time for comprehensive immigration reform. It is the time for border security. Would Democrats in the House be open to a package that only includes border security provisions without immigration reform, or is that a no-go?
Well, border security is part of a comprehensive solution to the challenges that we confront at the border. In terms of what we might ultimately have to consider, it's premature without seeing the specific provisions of whatever agreement may emerge from the Senate.
Yesterday, Congressman Goldman introduced a censure resolution against Stefanik over her hostages comments and other things. Were you read in on that before he introduced that? And are you going to encourage your members, should it come to the floor, to vote for it?
I have not seen the specifics of the resolution. It was my understanding that something was being drafted, and I look forward to reviewing it. I have tremendous respect for Congressman Goldman. He is one of the leaders in pushing back against the anti-democratic efforts that we have seen emerge from right-wing extremists in this country, and calling the January 6th violent insurrectionists hostages, parroting and mimicking the irresponsible rhetoric of the twice impeached former president is the height of irresponsibility.
So how would you characterize the conversation yesterday at the White House, and did you leave with more or less hope for a way forward?
It was important to have that conversation so that our Republican colleagues understand, with respect to the situation in Ukraine, that we are at risk of allowing Vladimir Putin and his brutal aggression to succeed because of America's inaction. It is in America's national security interests for Ukraine to prevail. This is a battle between democracy and autocracy, between freedom and tyranny, between truth and propaganda. And Ukraine is on the side of democracy, freedom, truth, as well as, most importantly, America's national security. At the meeting, the administration and several Democratic senators and members of the House made clear that America has a vested interest in Ukraine's success in preserving freedom and order in Europe in support of our European allies. Heading into this conflict, Russia had the largest, toughest military in Europe. It was expected in February of 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, that they would be in Kyiv within a week, and that Ukraine and its military would fall. We are now approaching 2 years later, and the Ukrainian effort, because of Ukrainian bravery, courage, and resilience, and United States assistance, has been incredibly effective. It is estimated that more than 80% of Russia's military has been wiped out without a single American boot on the ground. 50% of Ukraine's territory that had been initially seized by Putin and Russia has been recaptured. And Russia and its ability to menace our European allies significantly reduced. All of that progress is at risk if the United States Congress does not act. And that was, I think, an important part of the conversation yesterday. And hopefully my Republican colleagues, particularly in the House, got the message.
If there's a motion to vacate against Speaker Johnson, would Democrats consider helping keep him in office?
We haven't had a discussion about how we would confront a hypothetical motion to vacate.
Touching on the Ukraine thing just a moment more, Speaker Johnson's made it very clear that border security is tied to that aid, but also I think recently suggested that having some sort of end game articulated by the administration would also need to be a component of that. Did that come up in the meeting, and if so, what did the president say in response?
Well, Speaker Johnson articulated his perspective about continuing to tie aid to Ukraine with border security, and by the way, in doing so, limiting the ability to meet the needs of our other allies throughout the world, including Israel, Japan, South Korea. It limits our ability to address the challenges that we confront in the Indo-Pacific, and it limits our ability to provide humanitarian assistance to Palestinian civilians in Gaza who are in harm's way through no fault of their own. And in the view of many of us, it has been irresponsible that many Republicans appear to be willing to play partisan political games in undermining America's national security interest. I think there were several members on the Democratic side of the aisle in that meeting who made it clear that we are ready, willing, and able to come to a bipartisan, comprehensive resolution of all of the issues that are on the table, including addressing the challenges at the border, as long as whatever changes that are being contemplated are humane and effective. Last question?
Just to follow back up on Ukraine, was there any discussion of the Repo Act about confiscating Russian state assets at the meeting yesterday? And do you have a stance on that bill?
There was not any discussion of the Repo Act, but I think it is an intriguing possibility that is worthy of consideration. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How are you, Mr. Fry?
Doing fine.